Can you hear me as well?
Great. So I've been charged with just asking some questions of these two fabulous women who join the stage with me now, and just have a conversation and a bit of a dialogue about some of the themes and ideas that we've just been talking about. And it's always really great and exciting when there's a lot of synergy between the way that we have been thinking about and working through this big idea of adornment. And so I thought that one thing that came up was that each of you talking about the body as a way of telling story, and narratives, like bigger narratives, and complex and violent and oppressed histories. And I think it's interesting to, if you just think about commenting on the creation of this archive that, you obviously in your research, Dorian, reach back into. I'm interested to hear that for starters. Is it books? Is it museums that you go in to kind of get reference points in order for you to create? And then you're really building an archive in the archaeological work that you're doing, because you're pulling out literally the material, remnants of things that have, fallen away over time.
So actually, no, I don't do any research. It's all
inside you.
It's inside of me. And the really fascinating thing about it is, like, the pieces I made for Roots, I didn't have time really to research. And when I walked into the costume department for Black Panther, it was really amazing, because we walked in and Ruth had pictures and images of just tribal people with adornments on. And one of the pieces that I had made for Roots, there was an image of a man wearing the exact mask that I had created, but I had never seen it before. So that's happened twice, actually. That happened then, and then I went to the Fine Arts Museum in Virginia, and there was a West African installation of jewelry and adornments. And actually, I'm wearing the piece. There was something similar to this, and I did not research this. And it was a ritualistic piece for, I forget which ritual it was, but no, I didn't do any research. It's just something that comes from within.
That's great.
I think for me in the work that I do, especially looking at everyday practices of adornment and thinking about that from slavery through freedom, mainly in the New World, in the Americas context, I think about what it meant for Black women who had a society attempt to strip them of their humanity and break them down to just production, their production, what they could reproduce. And think about what it meant for those people to then adorn themselves in their most basic form. What would it mean to actually put beads, what it would mean to actually want to dye your clothing and put value onto flesh that had been deemed a commodity, but to say to yourself that you're valuable and to put that out into the world. I think that really, like the thought of that and the knowing of that really drives this work. And the archaeology, I feel like it opens itself up to that. I think about, the process of creating in archaeology. It feels like I often call myself a storyteller, because I'm telling stories about people who you don't often find in archival spaces. And it means asking particular questions and being really curious in particular ways. But also thinking about where knowledge comes from. Like I think about, when you mentioned you were having all of these dreams. Like I tell people, my master's thesis came to me in a dream. I fell asleep, I wrote it in my sleep, and I woke up and then I typed it. So I know that, like, the power of that, where it's just like, oh no, there are knowledges everywhere that are coming to us and being downloaded into us. And we're all in different mediums in which that comes out in a particular way.
Yeah, I love how you say that, because, you're just thinking about knowledges and different knowledges that have and haven't been acknowledged in the past as real. And I think that's something I really try and do in the work that I'm doing at the museum is really allow a space for oral histories and stories and people's personal and emotional and genetic and psychic memory, to come into the space and be taken seriously, because so much of the academy and the scholarship and the connoisseurship and the language and vocabulary we use, it's almost like you're taking it from a platform that people, you need to prove it to people for them to really think it's true. And I really have come to think about the galleries for the Pacific that I look after at the Met as a place to host people, because that's a very, that's how we roll in the Pacific. We host people. So when people come to New York and they're in town, I just ask them to come to the gallery so that they can, acknowledge their ancestors. Sometimes they'll start singing or chanting to the art, and that's just the best way, I think, for the public to see the connected relationship that people have with the collection, that it's not this static resource, that it's real, that it activates all those ancestral lines. They just come right out of the past into the now, and it is real. And so, that's a kind of power in itself, something that I'm trying to have people see happen in the museum so we can take it seriously. Yeah.
I think about that when I first saw Black Panther. I went to see Black Panther in New Orleans, and it was an event. They sold out the theater, and it was an all-Black crowd. It was absolutely amazing, and there was something about being able to see ourselves on that screen in a particular way, and so much of that had to do with the jewelry that was present there. It was like, oh man, and at the time I had no hair too, so I was like, I need to get more bold pieces on my skin. But I really like that being able to see yourself in particular mediums, it's so powerful. It's so powerful.
Definitely. When I first saw it, it was like a preview. I broke down because I had never seen myself look so powerful and beautiful, and I could not imagine how it felt for younger women and children, young girls, to see themselves like that. And the intention behind the armor was to make jewelry that looked like armor, so it still had that feminine aspect, but it was still strong and powerful and very bold. And I was so appreciative of that moment, because what happened after that was, like, on the red carpets, fashion changed. After that, Lupita, like, I was able to place some things on her, Angela Bassett, Hannah Beechler, during her Oscar moment. She was wearing one of my pieces. The only piece that she decided to wear was a face piece that looked like a tattoo. And her intention was to look absolutely fabulous in this white space, but still bring her ancestry and that strength to her look and to who she is. So it's definitely been a season, and I hope it's a really long season of women really adorning themselves from a place of strength and not trend.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a point, so I kind of like to think about this now. You're saying women choosing to present themselves how they want and in an empowered way, where having that gaze kind of subverted, because so much of the history perhaps of women in art, or for a long time certainly, they were objects of gaze. And so can you talk, you used the term armor then, so it's interesting just to think about what's going on in that moment. They're kind of armoring themselves up, but also projecting how you want to be seen.
So what comes up to me when you say that, and especially about the gaze, is reprogramming how we see women, reprogramming how women see themselves, and how we interact with the world. So yes, the armor. How I'm applying that to my work now is crafting, creating pieces and imagery that reminds oneself, so whether that's crystals, different symbols, and making sure that that woman has that armor when she goes out into the world. And then that also allows her to reprogram other people of how to interact with her. That's one thing I realized with the film as well, is that it was pretty much 3 hours of reprogramming the world of how they see blackness. Yeah, yeah, so, yeah, oh, thanks.
And then there's something about scale going on when I think about, you know, the boldness of your works and this, you know, empowerment, and then these beautiful fragile beads and broken things. And, you know, when you were talking with me earlier, you were saying about how the textiles, you know, the things that held these pieces together have, you know, returned to the ground, but we're left with these really fine, small things. Do you want to comment on that?
What that makes me think of is one of my sort of earliest introductions into historical archaeology, and I was really fortunate to enter into that field in a space where a professor, it focused on blackness and it focused on racial politics, and I think because of that I was able to see myself in the work. And one of the examples that was brought up in class was around the New York African Burial Ground, and I don't know if anyone in the audience has been to that site, but one of the burials that was excavated of a young woman, and this was a burial site for enslaved Africans in New York. One of the only sort of living symbols of adornment on one of the skeletal remains was waist beads. Everything else had fallen away. And oftentimes even thinking about the archaeology, like the textiles fall away, but there were buttons and beads that also were made of more animal fibers that we don't have access to, made out of calcium that we don't have access to because they also disintegrate. But wrapped around her waist, as they excavated her, were these beads. And they were her waist beads, and they laid there, and they, after hundreds of years, were a symbol that even after the brutality of the transatlantic slave trade, of being pulled from the continent of Africa to the coast, to then be transplanted, to then oftentimes have to wait, to then be sold, to then still be, there's all this movement that happens in that. To know that this woman died and was buried, and the practice that came with that was to hold on to that, that's divine. And it's very small, but it speaks vibration. So I think about like the very small pieces, and even in my own work in Texas, I look at everyday practices of dressing up and dressing down and how it's situational, and how we have to feel and be safe to do that. And in Texas, especially thinking about where my family comes from, Falls County, I don't know if anyone knows where that is, but it's a little outside of Waco, and Waco was known during the Jim Crow era as being a space where black people were lynched. So dressing up was dangerous because there's historical records of judges literally stripping people of their clothing if they came into town too dressed up. How dare you dress above your status? So there's a way that dressing down became a practice of safety in often white spaces, but then you could situationally dress up in your Sunday best and be in community. And that is something that's also spectacular and special, and you get to see that. I think about at the Levy Jordan Plantation, we have a lot of material culture that's recovered, and it's really beautiful, like sterling silver pieces. There are beautiful glass buttons as well, beautiful carved shell buttons that are more expensive in that sort of regard, and a lot of plain fasteners as well. So knowing that people were situationally dressing themselves and having these negotiations with self and community.
Thank you so much, both of you, for really kind of sharing with us your, you know, these things that move you to create this incredible work that you're both doing. Yeah. I'm going to open it out to the audience now because I think there are probably people that really want to ask you questions directly. Sure. Yeah.
Hello, pleasant good afternoon to those seen and unseen. My name is Takia, and my question was around spirituality. It was mentioned a little bit earlier, but I would love to find out from both of you how spirit either was reflected in the work that you do, but also how it showed up, and what, like, even for you personally or in the people who you work with.
Go ahead. Okay. So I mentioned earlier my MA thesis was really like a dream that came to me. My dissertation was a conversation I was having with my maternal mothers. And I stand by that when I think of the stories and the narratives that are told, and that I know that I'm speaking of Sally, I'm speaking of Debbie, I know I'm speaking of Susan, and just, I know that they show up so beautifully there. But then also in the work itself, thinking about intersectionality and thinking about the ways in which race, class, gender, those are the sort of three that I mainly talked about, but also geographic location, spiritual practices, and how that shows up and what people are wearing, how they're dressing their bodies as well. So that's also part of the conversation when thinking about all the aspects that come into this work.
I feel like my work is spiritual. I feel that whatever we put on our bodies is an extension of us, and I believe that we are spirits having a human experience. So before I begin creating, I have my own little ritual, and it's nothing big. I like to get excited. I put on my music. I put on, whether it's Afrobeat or something, just to get me in this vibe of appreciation and gratitude, that I'm creating something for somebody who is excited to have me create for them, number one, and is wanting a piece that represents them very well within the world, and a piece that reminds them of who they are. And so that starts with me dancing. I like to dance. So I'll dance in gratitude, I'll pray in gratitude, I'll sage my space, do all of that. And make sure I'm focused on the person and their well-being, and then the actual creating of the piece. Most of the time I do not sketch my work, I just let it come out. So people will tell me what their intention is, what they're wanting to do. I look at them, who they are, their style, where they are intending on wearing this piece, and I'll start building and creating from there. And then it's like a co-creating process, because we're working together, where they're getting to know the process more, and I get to know a little bit more about them. And so, and then I like to use crystals. So the crystals, something will tell me like, okay, use this, use that, use, like right now I'm using tanzanite for one of my clients. She works on Wall Street. And she's always wanting a piece to make sure when she goes into her board meetings that she's okay, that she's very sure of herself and very confident. So I'm creating a piece that has her history within it, and then some extra additional reminders of like her spiritual fortitude.
Cool. More one of those. More questions? Can't see anything.
What's up, everybody? How you doing?
Hi, Jafar.
You guys are doing a great job. So, and congratulations on the baby boy. I have to say it now.
Thank you.
But I want to know, have you considered like, or ever thought about, I guess it's two parts of the question now, like partnerships with like mineral people? Like I just got back from Senegal and was talking to these farmers and stuff like that. And have you ever forged any partnerships, like where you get your materials from in terms of like fair trade? Are you going in that direction at all? And the other question is, oh, this is two parts. These are maybe not as connected as I thought, but I'm gonna say them both. The other thing, and either one, that goes for both of you or any of you guys. How are you getting into business relationships with the people of these around the world. Is that happening at all? And then maybe another part, anybody can answer the question is, do you have a story that's about somebody, like you've created for somebody, something for somebody, and then they had like, it enhanced their personal energy where they came back and testified to you like, wow, yeah, the thing I wanted actually happened, or my mom, lasted an extra 2 years after I gave her the bracelet, or anything you want to say in that regard, if that's not too much.
I will respond very quickly. So for the first one, yes. After we wrapped the film, I went to Tanzania, and I met someone who has resources, amethyst, opal, tanzanite. Tanzanite's a little tricky to get here. But yes, I have. Yes. Second one, yes, indeed. So this was a while ago. This was even before I understood what I was doing and the work I was creating. I had a show, someone purchased a ring with carnelian in it. Or was it red agate? It's carnelian. And I didn't know this woman. It was like an online pop-up one-day thing. And a few weeks later, she had emailed me and said, thank you so much for this piece. My father just passed. It was very hard for me to process this, but I've been wearing this ring and it's been improving just my emotional well-being. And so she Googled what the crystal meant, and it was for being able to process death. So because of that, I've been able to I've really acknowledged this gift and started really doing it more intentionally. But it happened. It's happened, yes.
Was I supposed to respond about how I...
The resources.
Well, materials, really.
Well, the materials. I think about the research that I do on St. Croix. It's a really community collaborative project. So we've been in conversation with the Afro-Caribbean community from day one, and it was actually one of the reasons why my colleague and I, Justin, were brought into that space to have these conversations about what community wanted to see out of this space, what sort of final products they wanted as well. So I think about, as someone who is in academia, what I need to, sustain my job, oftentimes it's not what the community needs to sustain itself. So there's a practice that my colleague and I, Justin, are developing called sustainable archaeology, and really thinking about what markets are on island that need sustainable resources and how our work could feed into that. So in addition to doing terrestrial archaeology, I'm also training to do maritime work. So part of the work is also getting students on island to do both maritime and terrestrial work, because the scuba diving industry is more, popping than cultural heritage tourism in a way. And there are no, prior to us doing this work, there were no young Black Peruvian youth who were involved in the scuba industry, not even in the shop, not even selling, and there was no sort of desire to involve them in that. But now there are 3 of them who are in these shops and are finding resources to be able to work with the National Park Service now. So I think what I'm trying to do is what I'm trying to do in this work is to be in service of, and I feel like I hear that a lot in your work as well, where it's like the jewelry that you're producing is in service of what people need and their desires, their dreams, what they're manifesting. So there's a way that it's outpouring rather than this is a sole sort of work that I do for myself, for my gratification, and for my employment. It's definitely more community and integrated in that way.
And a whole generation coming up that you're inspiring, which is incredible, and makes, that's the active agency of it, as well, spiritual, but also creating this pathway for the future, really important.
My question is for all of you, and I wanted to hit on because you talked about the tattooing especially for the Polynesian women, and even in Black Panther, some of the characters, they wore their adornments through tattooing, like the design on the warrior's head, and the photos you've shown of the Polynesian women with the tattoos on their face. Do you think that is as significant as the jewelry that you make, because this ties into who they are and a representation of themselves?
Well, certainly in Polynesia, yeah, it's a huge part of the resurgence, cultural renaissance, really, of the people who were really, you know, under it. And it's, you know, it's really powerful what the Moko Kauai debate has kind of mobilized in terms of who has the rights to wear the Moko Kauai, because there have been what we call Pākehā, is the name, Māori name for European settlers and that community in New Zealand. And there have been controversial cases where Pākehā women, or one in particular, took the kauai, and the man that tattooed her was roundly criticised because it's really part of you know, mana wahine movement, which is saying that this is our thing, and you can't just come and think that you can have that stamped on you too, because this is actually definitely something that you don't have a right to, and all the kind of knowledge embedded in it, and the kind of deep network of genealogy that it speaks to. You know, as I said, it's really thought to be on the inside, and it just comes out of you. So, you know, it's visible for you when you need that in your life as a kind of armature, spiritual and physical, to you know, have you lead the life that you want to live, and all the duties and obligations and responsibilities that come with that. And it is a kind of like another childbirth. And in fact, Pacific men people have commented on the fact that Pacific men in the Pacific have tattooed themselves as a way of finding that equivalence with childbirth, because the kind of undergoing of that pain and the laboring of childbirth is a kind of something that they acknowledge women and are slightly, you know, not jealous, have that, so they created a system in a sense where they can kind of feel some of that. So it's really relevant. It's really relevant to what's going on in New Zealand at the moment today. Yeah, it still has a really important cultural legacy. Yeah. Can't see who's there. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'd like to thank the three of you for doing this. I've been sitting here tingling, listening to you. And some of it is because I work at probably the best preserved plantation in the country. And it's where my ancestors were enslaved. And they moved me as the ancestors moved you. So thank you for your creation. Thank you for your work. And my question is this. By the way, it's called Monticello. It's in Charlottesville, Virginia. My question to you is this. Since you are so moved by your ancestors, since you dream your creation, academic work, I wonder if you could work together, moved by your ancestors, moved by our ancestors, to create something that represents the enslaved. Something that we can use, something that we can adorn ourselves with. I looked at your jewelry online. There's something called, now I can't think of it, Reclamation, which is a project that I borrowed for myself. So I'm going to get that ring called Reclamation. but I wondered if you could bring to life for all of us a feeling of self-worth that the enslaved truly had, because they survived. Because they made it possible for us to be here now. So it's an idea that I can think about. Thank you.
Would you like to collaborate? That's a heavy request. But
And I've actually, I had a recent fellowship. Yeah, at Monticello, I was working with the Digital Archaeological Archive of Comparative Slavery. It's a very long title. But yeah, I was just there for about 2 months. But I would be overjoyed.
okay, we should talk to her about it. About it afterwards, but I think that would be heavy to do. A lot of, for me, very emotional to process. It's probably necessary as well. So yeah, I'm down. Thank you for that. I think that's okay.
Second row, you have a question in the second row here? The gentleman here?
I'm embarrassed to follow up that question with something that's a little more pedestrian, but what happened to all of the jewelry and pieces that you created for the film? And has there ever been thought to having a traveling exhibition for them, perhaps featured at Nîmois or sponsored by Nîmois?
The pieces went into Marvel's warehouse. And do I want to put this person on blast? Yes. So most of them went into the warehouse, and then during the cleanup, some people decided that they wanted them in their homes. So some people took them. I mean, that's what happens sometimes. And then they did do a traveling exhibit of the costumes, but not specifically the jewelry. I know pre-Oscar season, Ruth Carter, the costume designer, she definitely did her rounds. Like they had something at the Smithsonian African American Museum, but maybe something at Nîmois as well. I know that that's something to talk about. I know that we are working on Coming to America 2 right now. So that's something to revisit and talk to her about. Yeah.
You know, hello.
It's very
To the ancestors, those of us who made it, who are descendants of the Middle Passage, people who made it here and survived. There's a real strong spirit with the ancestors that the older I get, the more I realize that many thousands of people don't know this. Only we know this, that it is so powerful and so real that it will pull us into any greatness and out of the worst degradation. And we didn't really know it because it wasn't taught to us, but we knew it because it was inside of us. And now, as you get older, you know this is real. This is really real. And we wish we could let the children know, but it's a serious thing. What in your creations have come from this death of who I know you both. I know, you know we know it, but we know that nobody else knows it. I could be wrong.
I was so caught up in the way she said that. That was so beautiful. Oh my goodness. Well said. So, wait, what was the...
I think that is.
I feel like it was a statement.
It was a statement.
It was a really powerful statement.
It was a very powerful... Was it a statement? Was that a question? Like you just... filled my soul so much, so well. What was the question?
Energy that transcends from the ancestors into you.
Oh,
Totally.
okay.
You knew where it came from. You knew exactly. And this is what the secret. You know how sometimes you feel like you see the angels, the ancestors. See, we were, I just didn't know that many people don't really know that within us. And it's only me. And I just really wanted to know, gosh, have you created, or has that touched your creativity in a mighty way somewhere, really?
That collection I showed earlier was that collection you speak of. At the time, is it a but? Yes, but I didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just acting. I was just creating. I was in action. Okay, so I'll share a story to give context. At the time, that was right after Roots, I found myself living in my art studio. So it was like a 10 by 10 room, living there. And I went through a process of, like I said, trying to find that tribe, trying to figure out what I was doing. Like I felt like it was an incredible gift, but I could not figure out where it was taking me. I felt like I had the dreams, I had the visions, I was hearing something guide me, but I thought I was just going crazy. But I followed those impulses and listened, and that came out. Those pieces came out. From those pieces and the imagery, I shared those with Ruth, which got me to where I'm at right now. I do feel like ancestral work is very important. I feel like right now that there's a lot of guidance that we need, and our society, we're distracted. We're always on our phones. We're not really, oh, Khalil. He's agreeing with me. And I feel like our society, especially my generation, we're not as present as we should be. So I do feel like there's an ancestral moment now where the ancestors are speaking to us, and there's folks that are doing work like we're doing that are bringing that into this physical world to make people pay attention. And so I'm really thankful for like films like Black Panther, because they talk about that. I mean, a lot of it is about that, the ancestral realm, to make that more visible and noticed. So yes, to answer your question. You're welcome.
And I think time is something that's really run through this whole panel. In the Pacific, we really have quite a distinct notion of time. You actually walk backwards into the future because you face your ancestors. And so when you meet people in New Zealand, Maori will greet each other, tēnā koe, and you'll press noses and share breath. But there's a kind of implicit line, set of interlocking triangles actually, because tēnā koe means all those with you here. So you see all of their people and then all of those that you bring. And you meet in this point in the middle. And so, you know, you face the past because that's what you know to be true and self-evident. But you're looking over your shoulder as you walk backwards into the future. So we have this incredible work of archaeology that you're doing, and you know, you're projecting us into this really exciting and bold future. So I thank you both. It's been a real privilege.